Secondly, from the law of nature I may argue, first, if God, the fountain of all power, and author of all right, hath given unto man both the power and the right of, and reason to manage self-defense, and hath no ways interdicted it in his word to be put forth against tyrants, then it is duty to use it against them upon occasion. But the former is true. Therefore, secondly, if this power and right were restrained in man against the unjust violence of any, it would either be by policy or grace or some express prohibition in the word of God. But none of these can be said. Therefore, policy cannot destroy nature, but is rather cumulative to it. A man entering into a politic incorporation does not lose the privilege of nature. If one particular nature may defend itself against destroying violence out of society, then must many of these natures combined in society have the same right, and so much the more that their relative duties superadd an obligation of mutual assistance. Grace does not restrain the right of sinless nature, though it restrains corruption. But self-defense is no corruption. Grace makes a man more a man than he was. And nothing can be more dishonorable to the gospel than that by the law of nature it is lawful to resist tyrants. But we are bound by religion from withstanding their cruelty. The laws of God do not interfere one with another. Thirdly, that law which alloweth comparative reoffending, so as to kill rather than be killed, teacheth resistance. But so the law of nature alloweth, except we be guilty of murder in the culpable omission of self-defense. The reason is, because the love of self is nearer and greater, as to temporal life, than the love of our neighbor, that being the measure of this. Therefore it obliges rather to kill than be killed, the exigence of necessity so requiring. Fourthly, if nature put no difference between the violence of a tyrant than of another man, then it teaches to resist both alike. But it putteth no difference, but rather aggravates that of a tyrant, being the violence of a man, the injustice of a member of the commonwealth, and the cruelty of a tyrant. And it were absurd to say we might defend ourselves from the lesser violence, and not from the greater. Fifthly, if particular nature must yield to the good of universal nature, then must one man, though in greatest power, be resisted, rather than the universal commonwealth suffer hurt. But the former is true, for that dictates the necessity of the distracted father to be bound by his own sons, lest all the family be hurt. Ergo, the greatest of men or kings, when destructive to the commonwealth, must be resisted, for he is but one man, and so but particular nature. Sixthly, that which is irrational and reflects upon providence as putting men in a worse condition than brutes is absurd and contrary to the law of nature. But to say that the brutes have power to defend themselves by resisting what annoys them, and deny this power to men, is irrational and reflects upon providence as putting men in a worse condition than brutes. Therefore it is absurd and contrary to the laws of nature. Third, from the institution of government I may argue thus, that power and government which is not of God may be resisted. The tyrant's power and government in overturning laws, subverting religion, bringing in idolatry, oppressing subjects is not of God. Ergo, it may be resisted. The major is clear, because the ordinance of God is not to be resisted, Romans 13, verse 2. But they that resist a man, destroying all the interests of mankind, overturning laws, subverting religion, etc., do not resist the ordinance of God. And, if it were not so, this would tend irremediously to overthrow all policies, and open a gap to all disorder, injustice, and cruelty, and would give as great encouragement to tyrants to do what they list as thieves would be encouraged if they knew nobody would resist them or bring them to punishment. Fourth, from the original constitution of government by men, it may be argued thus. If people at first erection of government acted rationally and did not put themselves in a worse case than before, wherein it was lawful to defend themselves against all injuries, but devolved their rights upon the fiduciary tutory of such as should remain still in the rank of men that can do wrong, who had no power but by their gift, consent, and choice, with whom they associated not to their detriment but for their advantage, and determined the form of their government, and time of its continuance, and in what causes they might recur to their primeval liberty, and settled a succession to have course, not jure hereditario, but jure et leges, for good ends. Then they did not give away their birthright of self-defense and power of resistance, which they had before to withstand the violence, injuries, and oppressions of the men they set over them, when they pervert the form and convert it to tyranny, but did retain a power and privilege to resist and revolt from them, and repel their violence when they should do violence to the constitution and pervert the ends thereof. The former is true, ergo the minor is cleared, head 2. And the connection is confirmed from this. If the estates of a kingdom give the power to a king, it is their own power in the fountain, and if they give it for their own good, they have power to judge when it is used against themselves and for their evil, and so power to limit and resist the power that they gave. Fifth, from the way and manner of erecting government by compact, the necessity whereof is proven, head 2. Many arguments may be deduced. I shall reduce them to this form. If people must propose conditions unto princes, it may to be by them acquiesced in and submitted unto their admission to the government, which thereupon becomes the fundamental laws of the government, and securities for the people's rights and liberties, giving a law claim to the people's rights and liberties, giving a law claim to the people to pursue the prince in case of failing in the main and principal thing covenanted, as their own covenanted mandatorius, who had no just nor authority of his own, but what he hath from them, and no more power but what is contained in the conditions upon which he undertaketh the government. Then, when either an usurper will come under no such conditions, or a tyrant doth break all these conditions, which he once accepted, and so became stricto jure no prince, and the people be stricto jure liberated from subjection to him, they may and must defend themselves in their fundamental rights and privileges, religion and laws, and resist the tyranny overturning them. But the former is true, ergo the connection is clear, and the minor is proved, head 2. And at length demonstrated and applied to the government of Charles II by just populi, cap 6, see argument 4 and 5, head 2. Sixth, from the nature of magistracy, it may be argued thus, that power which is properly neither parental nor marital, nor masterly and despotic, over the subjects, persons, and goods, but only fiduciary and by way of trust, is more to be resisted than that which is properly so. But that power which is properly so, that is parental power, and marital, and masterly, may be resisted in many cases. Therefore that power which is not so properly, but only fiduciary, is more to be resisted. That a king's power over his subjects is neither parental nor marital, etc., is proven in head 2. And the major needs no probation. The minor is clear by instances. First, if children may, in case of necessity, resist the fury of their father, seeking to destroy them, then must private subjects resist the rage and tyranny of princes, seeking to destroy them and what is dearest to them. For there is no stricter obligation, moral between king and people than between parents and children, nor so strict, and between tyrants and people there is none at all, but the former cannot be denied. Therefore, secondly, if wives may lawfully defend themselves against the unjust violence of enraged husbands, then must private subjects have power to resist the furious assaults of enraged tyrants, for there is not so great a tie betwixt them and people as between man and wife, yea, there is none at all, but the former is true. Ergo, thirdly, if servants may defend themselves against their masters, then must private subjects defend themselves against a tyrant or his emissaries, but the former is true. Ergo, fourthly, if the king's power be only fiduciary, and by way of pawn, which he hath got to keep, then when that power is manifestly abused to the hurt of them that entrusted him with it, he ought to be resisted by all whom he undertook to protect. But the former is true, therefore the latter. Seventh, from the limited power of princes it may be thus argued, if princes be limited by laws and contracts, and may be resisted by pleas in law, and have no absolute power to do and command what they will, but must be limited both by the laws of God and man, and cannot make what laws they will in prejudice of the people's rights, nor execute the laws made according to their pleasure, nor confer on others a lawless license to oppose whom they please. Then when they turn tyrants and arrogate a lawless absoluteness, and cross the rules, and transgress the bounds prescribed by God's laws and man's laws, and make their own lusts a law, and execute the same arbitrarily, they must be resisted by force, when a legal resistance cannot be had in defense of religion and liberty, but all princes are limited, etc. Therefore, the minor is proved, head 2. And the connection may be thus confirmed in short, that power which is not the ordinance of God may be resisted, but an absolute, illimited power, crossing the rules and transgressing the bonds prescribed by God's law and man's, is not the ordinance of God. Therefore, it may be resisted. Eighth, further from the rule of government, it may be argued several ways. Firstly, that power which is contrary to law, evil, and tyrannical, can tie none to subjection, but if it oblige to anything, it ties to resistance. But the power of a king against law, religion, and the interests of the subjects is a power contrary to law, evil, and tyrannical. Therefore, the major is plain, for wickedness can tie no man, but to resist it. That power which is contrary to law, evil, and tyrannical is wickedness. Secondly, that power and those acts which neither king can exercise, nor command, nor others execute, nor any obey, must certainly be resisted. But such is the power and acts that oppress the subjects and overturn religion and liberty. Therefore, the minor is evident from Scriptures condemning oppression and violence, both in them that command and in them that execute the same, and also them that obey such wicked commands. The major is clear from reason, both because such power and such acts as cannot be commanded, cannot be executed, cannot be obeyed lawfully, are sinful and wicked, and because it cannot be a magistrical power, for that may always be exercised and executed lawfully. And what a man cannot command, the resisting of that he cannot punish, but acts of oppression against law, religion, and liberty a man cannot command. Ergo, the resisting of these he cannot punish. Third, that government of administration which is not subordinate to the law and will of God, who hath appointed it, must be resisted. But that government or administration which undermines or overturns religion and liberty is not subordinate to the law and will of God. Therefore, the major is clear. For nothing but what is the ordinance of God, subordinate to his law and will, is irresistible. Romans 13, verse 2. The assumption is undeniable. Ninth, from the ends of government, which must be acknowledged by all to be the glory of God and the good of mankind, yea, all that have been either wise or honest have always held that the safety of the people is the supreme law. The argument may run thus in short. Firstly, that doctrine which makes the Holy One to cross his own ends in giving governors must be absurd and unchristian as well as irrational. But such is the doctrine that makes all kings and tyrants irresistible upon any pretense whatsoever. Ergo, the minor I prove. That doctrine which makes God, intending his own glory and the people's good, to give governors both as fathers to preserve and as murderers to destroy them, must make the Holy One to cross his own ends. For these are contradictory. But the doctrine that makes all kings and tyrants irresistible, etc., is such. For by office they are fathers to preserve, and by office also they must be murderers, vested with such a power from God by the first act, if they be irresistible when they do so, seeing every power that is irresistible is the ordinance of God. Hence also when a blessing turns a curse, it is no more the ordinance of God, but to be resisted. But when a king turns a tyrant, overturning religion and liberty, then a blessing turns a curse. Therefore, secondly, means are to be resisted when they are not useful for, but destructive to the ends they were appointed for. But governors overturning religion and liberty are means not useful for, but destructive to the ends for which they were appointed. Seeing then they are neither for the glory of God nor the good of mankind.